The phone slipped from my hands when I heard my own daughter, Eleanor, say those words that broke my soul in half. Of course, I'm not going to invite my mother. Imagine what a total embarrassment she'll be in front of Adrian's family. Her voice sounded so cold, so calculating, as if she was talking about discarding an old piece of furniture she no longer needed. I stood there in the hallway of my own house, with the receiver on the floor, and my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. 64 years of life, 8 years of widowhood, and 38 years of being a mother to that child, only to discover she considered me a disgrace. The conversation continued on the other end of the line. Eleanor was talking to someone, probably Mary, my daughter-in-law, that tacky influencer who constantly posts pictures of the house I bought for my son, Michael. You know how Mom is. George will think we're from, well, you get it. Adrian's already accepting enough about where we come from. Where we come from? Had she forgotten that because of where we came from, she was able to study architecture at the most expensive university in the country? That thanks to my ant-like work, getting up at 5 in the morning for decades to build my small real estate empire, she could now afford to be selective with her clients. My legs trembled, and I had to lean against the wall. The wallpaper Eleanor chose last year, to make your house look more modern, Mom, now seemed like a mockery. Everything in this house screamed the money I had earned with my own 2 hands, the same money she spent as if it were water. Besides, you know Mom won't know how to behave. She'll show up in one of those horrible dresses she buys at the discount store. She'll talk too loudly. She'll tell embarrassing stories from when we were kids. Eleanor let out a nervous giggle that made my blood run cold. Adrian's family is very refined. His brother George is a diplomat. His mother was Miss Universe in the 80s. Can you imagine my mom trying to talk to those people? The receiver was still on the floor, but I couldn't move anymore. Every word was a dagger straight to my chest. This was the same girl who used to crawl into my bed when she had nightmares, the same one who hugged me, crying, when the other girls made fun of her worn-out shoes, the same one who swore that when she grew up, she would take care of me forever. Michael agrees with me, Eleanor continued. He also thinks it's better if Mom doesn't go. It's already going to be awkward enough having to explain why Dad isn't here. We don't need any more drama. Michael, my baby, the son I carried in my arms for his first 2 years because he was so sickly, the same one whose law school tuition I paid for and whose first condo I bought when he married Mary. Both of them, my 2 children, had decided that I was a disgrace. Eleanor's laugh echoed through the empty house. The best part is, she won't even notice. She's been so spacey lately, so, old. She probably won't even remember there's a wedding. That's when something inside me broke for good. It wasn't just the exclusion. It wasn't just the shame. It was the underestimation. They thought I was a silly, senile old lady they could manipulate at will, but they didn't know who they were messing with. I wasn't the clueless old lady they thought. I was Julia Mason, the woman who had turned a small $5,000 loan into a real estate empire of 20 properties. The same woman who had raised 2 children alone after their father died, working 18 hours a day so they would never lack for anything. I hung up the phone carefully, as if it were made of glass. My mind was already working at full speed, just like in the old days when I had to solve financial crises or negotiate with builders who thought they could cheat me because I was a woman. I had learned a long time ago that revenge is a dish best served cold, and that patience is the most powerful weapon an intelligent woman can have. I went to my study. That small sanctuary filled with file cabinets and contracts that my children had always avoided as if it were radioactive. "Mom's boring papers," Eleanor used to say when she was little. How ironic that those boring papers were exactly what had financed her luxuries her entire life. I turned on the computer and began to review all the transfers I had made in the last 5 years. Eleanor, luxury condo in the city, $400,000. Michael, a house in the hills, $600,000. Eleanor again, a BMW, $300,000. Michael, wedding expenses with Mary, $200,000. Eleanor, masters in Europe, $500,000. The list was endless. Each transfer had a sweet, manipulative justification. "Mom, it's an investment for my future." "Mary's pregnant and we need more space." "It's just going to be a loan. I'll pay you back in 6 months." Loans that were never repaid. Investments that only benefited them. As I reviewed the numbers, I remembered perfectly how it had all begun. It was 3 years after Robert, my husband, had died. I was heartbroken, lost, trying to navigate the world alone for the first time in my life. Eleanor had come home with tears in her eyes. "Mom, they offered me an incredible job opportunity, but I need to look more professional. Could you help me with a small loan to update my wardrobe?" A small loan, $30,000 for clothes. But I had said yes because seeing her cry broke me, because I wanted her to have all the opportunities I never had. That had been my first mistake, confusing love with money. Then it had been Michael. "Mom, Mary and I want to start a family, but this condo is too small. Could you help us with the down payment? Just the down payment. We'll pay the rest ourselves." Of course. 6 months later, they came back. The monthly payments are too high, and Mary had to stop working because of the pregnancy. In the end, I ended up paying for the whole house. The pattern had always been the same. They would come with a sad story, an urgent need, a promise of independence. "This is the last time, Mom. After this, we won't bother you again." "It's just until we get settled." Sweet lies wrapped in kisses on the cheek and calculated hugs. But I had been stupid. I had mistaken their need for my money for true love. I had believed I was a generous mother, when in reality, I was an emotional ATM. They would come, press the right buttons, and I would spit out bills. The most painful revelation came when I found the credit card statements I had put in their names. Eleanor had spent $50,000 last month, Michael $40,000, on expensive restaurants, designer clothes, weekend trips. They were living like millionaires with my money, while I was still buying my clothes at the discount store and cooking at home to save money. The phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Hello, Mom. How are you?" Her voice was now sweet, affectionate, completely different from the one she had used an hour earlier to talk about me as if I were a nuisance. "Hey, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over tomorrow? It's about the wedding." "Of course, my love. I'll be there tomorrow." I replied with the sweetest voice I could fake, but inside, a cold smile was forming on my lips. I knew exactly what Eleanor wanted to discuss with me. It wasn't my presence at her wedding, but my money to finance it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake until 3 in the morning, reviewing every document, every contract, every bank transfer. My brain worked like a calculating machine, adding up years of misinterpreted generosity and unrequited love, but also planning. Because if there was one thing I had learned in my decades as a businesswoman, it was that information is power. And I had a lot of information. The next day, I arrived at Eleanor's house at exactly 10 in the morning, as we had agreed. I wore my simplest dress, the one she hated so much, and my worn-out faux leather bag. I wanted to look exactly like the harmless old lady they thought I was. Eleanor greeted me with a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and lies. "Mom, I'm so glad you came. Sit down. I made you coffee." She poured it into one of the fine porcelain cups I had given her for her birthday, part of a set that cost more than a secretary's monthly salary. Everything in her house screamed luxury. The Italian furniture, the giant flat-screen TV, the works of art decorating the walls. My money converted into objects to impress strangers. "Look, Mom, I wanted to talk to you about the wedding." Eleanor sat across from me, crossing her legs with studied elegance. "You know, Adrian and I want something very special, very elegant. His family is very distinguished." There was that word again, distinguished, as if I were a second-class product that needed to be hidden so as not to ruin their premium image. I nodded, feigning the silly smile she expected from me. "The problem is that the costs have skyrocketed much more than we thought. The venue we wanted costs $200,000 just for the rental. Then there's the food, the flowers, the music, the photographer." Eleanor made a dramatic pause, as if the numbers were terribly overwhelming. "In total, we're talking about almost $800,000. $800,000. It was more money than many families see in their entire lives. Eleanor said it as if it were a reasonable amount for a 6-hour party. I took a sip of my coffee and maintained my neutral expression. Adrian has put in his share, of course. His family is also contributing. But, another calculated pause, we need you to cover the difference. It's about $400,000. $400,000. Said so casually, like someone asking to borrow $20 for the bus. Eleanor played with her engagement ring as she spoke, that nervous gesture she'd had since she was a child when she was lying. Because she was lying. I knew perfectly well that Adrian's family had not contributed a single penny. I knew it because I had investigated. I know it's a lot of money, Mom, but think of it as an investment in my future. Adrian has very important contacts. This marriage can open many doors for my career. Besides, her voice became sweet, manipulative. It will be the last big favor I ask of you. After this, we're going to be completely independent. The last time. How many times had I heard that phrase? It was like a broken record that repeated every time they needed money. The last time I bother you, Mom. After this, we won't need anything. It's the last investment in our future. Sweet lies that I had swallowed again and again like a fool, in love with the illusion of being needed. And Mom, Eleanor leaned forward, taking my hands with her perfectly manicured ones. I know we haven't officially invited you yet, but that's because we want to surprise you. The truth is, we're planning something very intimate, very family-oriented, just the closest people. More lies. I had seen the guest list lying on her coffee table. 250 people. Politicians, businessmen, influencers, all the important people Eleanor needed to build her image of a successful woman. But her own mother wasn't on that list. I just need you to confirm the money so I can book everything. The vendors are waiting. Eleanor squeezed my hands, feigning vulnerability. I trust you, Mom. You've always been there for me. You've always been there to pay for their whims, to finance their dreams, to clean up their financial messes. But when I needed emotional support, when I felt lonely after Robert's death, when Sundays became eternal in this empty house, they were not there. Of course, my love, I replied with the same maternal smile I had perfected over the years. You know I will always support you in everything. Eleanor sighed with relief, as if she had been holding her breath. She had no idea that I already knew the whole truth. You're the best mom in the world, she said, kissing my cheek with those lips that tasted like falsehood. I promise you, this wedding is going to be perfect. Adrian is always so grateful to you. He talks about how lucky he is to have such a generous mother-in-law. Adrian, the perfect fiancé who had never said more than 5 words in a row to me, in the 2 years he had been dating Eleanor, the same one who got uncomfortable every time I came to visit, as if my presence contaminated the sophisticated environment they had created. But of course, my money didn't contaminate it. They received that with open arms. When I left Eleanor's house, I drove directly to the office of William, my accountant, and one of the few true friends I had left. William had been Robert's right-hand man in the business, and after his death, he had become my most trusted advisor. He was one of the few men I knew who didn't underestimate me for being a woman. "Julia, what a surprise to see you here. Everything okay?" William got up from his desk with a genuine smile, one of those I no longer received at home. His office smelled of coffee and old papers, an aroma that calmed me because it reminded me of the time when Robert and I were building our empire together. "William, I need you to do me a very special favor. I want to know exactly how much money I have transferred to my children in the last 5 years, everything down to the last dollar." I sat in front of his desk, clasping my hands in my lap like the executive I had been for decades. William frowned. "Are you sure? Those numbers can be shocking." He knew my family well. He had been a silent witness to all their requests for money, all their financial emergencies that invariably became my responsibility. "I'm more than sure. I want exact numbers, dates, concepts, and I want you to tell me what my real financial situation would be if I stopped supporting them financially." My voice was firm, businesslike. I hadn't heard myself talk like that in years. William worked for 2 hours, typing numbers, reviewing transfers, calculating totals. I sat there watching as the years of my generosity turned into cold, brutal figures. When he finished, he handed me a sheet of paper with numbers that took my breath away. "In 5 years, Julia, you've transferred $2,800,000 to Eleanor and Michael. That's not counting the properties you've put in their names, the credit cards you pay monthly, and the life insurance policies for which they are beneficiaries." William looked at me with a mixture of compassion and admiration. "You are an incredibly generous woman." Generous. What a beautiful word to describe what had actually been my systematic stupidity. $2,800,000. It was more money than most people earn in their entire productive lives, and I had given it away to 2 people who considered me a disgrace. "Now tell me, William, if I were to completely cut off their financial support, how long do you think they could support themselves?" It was a rhetorical question. We both knew the answer. "Eleanor spends more than she earns every month. Her job as an architect allows her to live modestly, but not for the lifestyle she leads. Michael is better off, but the mortgage on the house, Mary's expenses, the luxuries. I'd say a maximum of 3 months before they're in serious trouble." 3 months. All their arrogance, all their shame toward me, all their supposed independence would collapse in 3 months without my money. It was valuable information, but also devastating. I had created 2 financial monsters who didn't know how to live without sucking my bank account dry. That night, alone in my house, I made a decision that would change everything. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive wine Eleanor had given me for my birthday last year, paid for with my money, of course, and I sat in my favorite armchair, the same one where Robert used to read me the financial news aloud, where we had planned every investment, every strategic move of our business. I took out my phone and dialed George's number. Adrian's brother. I had investigated enough to know that he was a diplomat, a serious and respectable person. If Eleanor was so ashamed of me, it was time for him to know exactly who the woman financing his brother's marriage was. "Good evening, George. This is Julia Mason, Eleanor's mother. I apologize for calling so late, but I need to talk to you about something very important regarding your brother's wedding." George's voice sounded surprised but courteous. "Of course, Mrs. Mason. Tell me, how can I help you?" "George, I need to clarify a few things about the wedding expenses. My daughter told me your family is contributing financially. But I think there's a misunderstanding. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. My voice sounded sweet, innocent, like that of a confused old lady who only wanted to avoid problems. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Mason, I'm afraid I don't understand. We haven't agreed to any financial contribution. Adrian told us that you and Eleanor had everything covered. His voice betrayed genuine confusion. Perfect. Eleanor had lied about that too. Oh, how strange. Well, don't worry, George. I'll take care of all the expenses. As always. I let that last phrase hang in the air like an accidental confession. As always. George now sounded intrigued. Forgive my curiosity, Mrs. Mason, but have you been financing Eleanor for a long time? There was my opportunity. Well, a mother has to do what she has to do for her children, right? Eleanor has had some economic challenges. Her condo, her car, her studies in Europe. All of that we have handled as a family. I made a calculated pause. But don't worry, I have enough properties to cover any expense. Properties. That word always caught people's attention. George was a diplomat. He knew the value of real estate. How generous you are, ma'am. Adrian never mentioned that Eleanor had financial needs. Oh, Eleanor is very proud. She doesn't like people to know that she depends on her mother. But just between us, George, she couldn't maintain her lifestyle without my help. Each word was a time bomb Eleanor would not see coming. After hanging up, I dialed Michael's number. It was time to test the loyalty of my youngest son, the one who had always been weaker, more easily manipulated than Eleanor. If there was any chance that one of my children was salvageable, it was him. Hello, Mom. Everything okay? It's very late. Michael's voice sounded sleepy but also nervous. Eleanor had probably already told him about our conversation about the money. Michael, my love, I need to talk to you about something very serious. It's about your sister's wedding. I settled into the armchair, preparing for the performance of a lifetime. Eleanor asked me for money for the wedding, a lot of money. But there's something that has me worried. What is it, Mom? Now Michael sounded completely awake. Well, lately, I've been thinking a lot about my future, about what's going to happen to me when I get older. You have your own lives, your own families. I let my voice crack slightly, as if it were a painful confession. Mom, what are you talking about? You're perfectly fine. But I could hear the discomfort in his voice. Michael knew exactly where this conversation was going. Yes, I'm fine now. But what's going to happen in 5 years? In 10? I don't want to be a burden on you. I made a dramatic pause. I've been thinking about selling some properties and moving to a smaller place, something I can manage on my own. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Michael was calculating. If I sold the properties, if I moved, if I became independent, his source of extra income would dry up. The houses he expected to inherit, the loans he never repaid, the financial cushion I represented. Mom, don't say things like that. We would never abandon you. You're part of our family. Sweet lies wrapped in poorly disguised panic. Oh, Michael, it's so good to hear that. Because the truth is that sometimes I feel like I'm in the way, like with Eleanor's wedding. I left the phrase incomplete, waiting for his reaction. What about Eleanor's wedding? Michael tried to sound casual, but I knew that voice. It was the same one he used when he was a kid and had broken something. Well, Eleanor told me they're going to have something very intimate, very small, just the most important people. And I understand, you know. At my age, I don't fit in at those elegant celebrations. My voice was pure maternal manipulation, mixing resignation with a hint of martyrdom. Michael swallowed audibly. Mom, I didn't know Eleanor had told you that. There must be a big misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, my love. Eleanor was very clear. She says Adrian's family is very distinguished, very refined, and I'm just an old lady who doesn't know how to behave in society. Each word was a dagger straight to his conscience. Mom, that's not true. Michael stopped. He couldn't complete the sentence without lying blatantly, and we both knew it. It's okay, Michael. I understand perfectly. You've grown. You've moved up socially. It's natural that you're ashamed of your mother who comes from a discount store. I made a long pause. I just hope that when I move and sell everything, you'll understand that it was because I wanted to give you space to shine without my shadow. The line was silent for almost a minute. Michael was processing the implications of my words. If I moved, if I sold the properties, if I became independent, they would have to learn to live on their own resources. Mom, don't make any hasty decisions. Let me talk to Eleanor. There must be a huge misunderstanding. I promise we'll fix this. I don't want you two to fight because of me. Michael's voice trembled slightly. I could hear Mary in the background asking what was wrong, her voice high-pitched and worried. It's okay, my love, but I've already made an important decision. Today I told Eleanor that yes, I will give her the money for her wedding. $400,000 will be my farewell gift before I simplify my life. The lie came from my lips like poisonous honey. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael was processing that Eleanor had asked for $400,000 while excluding him from the conversation. The siblings had always competed for my money, but they had learned to coordinate to maximize their gains. This broke their alliance. $400,000? Eleanor asked you for that much money? Michael's voice had changed. Now there was a note of betrayal in it. Yes, for the venue, the food, the flowers. She says it's going to be a very elegant wedding. I guess since you're already married, you don't need anything, right? Another calculated lie. Michael and Mary were always asking for money for something. Home renovations, vacations, Mary's new car. Mom, we have expenses too. Mary's pregnant again, and we're going to need to expand the house. Michael took the bait perfectly. Mary's pregnant? What wonderful news! I feigned surprise and joy, even though I knew perfectly well it was a lie. Mary had posted photos drinking wine on her social media last week. Of course I'll help you with that too. After all, you do include me in your lives. That last sentence was the final blow. Michael understood the message perfectly. Eleanor got money but excluded me. He included me but received nothing. It was an equation that did not benefit him at all. I hung up the phone, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long time, I was in control of the situation. My children were used to manipulating me, but they had forgotten that I had been a businesswoman long before I was a mother. I knew all the negotiation tactics, all the pressure strategies. The next day, early in the morning, the show began. Eleanor called me, hysterical, at 7 a.m. Mom, what did you say to Michael? He's furious with me. He says I'm selfish, that I'm excluding him from everything. Good morning, my love. I don't understand why Michael is upset. I just told him about your wedding, about how beautiful it's going to be. My voice was that of an innocent old lady who didn't understand why everyone was yelling. You told him I asked you for $400,000 and that I'm excluding him from the wedding. Eleanor was losing control, something very rare for her. She had always been calculating, cold. Well, it's the truth, isn't it? You asked me for that money yesterday. I made an innocent pause. And about Michael, well, he asked me if he was going to be at the wedding, and I told him it was only for important people. I thought he knew. Eleanor cursed under her breath. Mom, Michael is my brother. Of course he's invited to my wedding. Oh, that's good to know. So when you said important people, you were only referring to me. I understand. My voice was dripping with wounded innocence. I mean, Mom, of course you're important. It's just... Eleanor got stuck, unable to explain why her mother was not important enough for her own wedding. Don't worry, my love. I got the message. That's why I decided to simplify my life. Yesterday, I spoke with a real estate agent about selling some properties. If you no longer need me as a mother, at least I won't be a financial burden. I let those words sink into her brain like acid. You're going to sell properties? Which properties? Eleanor's voice had lost all pretense. Now it was pure financial panic. Well, first the beach house, then the downtown condos. George gave me some great advice yesterday on how to liquidate assets intelligently. I mentioned George casually, as if it had been a routine conversation. You talked to George? Adrian's brother? Now, Eleanor sounded on the verge of a heart attack. Yes, what a well-mannered young man. He explained that his family is not going to contribute financially to the wedding, that Adrian told them you and I had everything under control. Dramatic pause. He asked me a lot about my properties. He seemed very impressed. Eleanor hung up without saying goodbye. I knew she was running to call Adrian, probably to ask him what he had said exactly to his family about the Masons' financial situation. For the next 3 days, my phone didn't stop ringing. It was like watching the dominoes fall one by one. First, Michael called, trying to convince me to go to lunch with him and Mary to clear things up. Then, Eleanor, with a strangely sweet voice, inviting me to have coffee to plan the wedding details together. Then Michael again, offering to take me to the doctor because I sounded very stressed lately. But the most revealing call came on Thursday night. It was Joan, my 16-year-old granddaughter, Michael and Mary's daughter. Her voice sounded different, more mature than usual. Grandma, can I come see you tomorrow after school? I need to talk to you. Joan had always been special, the only one in the family who seemed to inherit my instinct for business and my ability to see through lies. Of course, my love. Come whenever you want. Joan was my weakness, the only person in this family who loved me without financial conditions. The next day, Joan arrived at my house in her school uniform and with a serious expression that reminded me of myself at her age. She sat in the kitchen, declined the juice I offered her, and got straight to the point. Grandma, Dad and Mom have been talking a lot about you lately, arguing in low voices, stopping conversations when I walk into the room. Joan had Robert's eyes, those eyes that didn't miss a single detail. Mom is obsessed with checking her bank accounts, and Dad looks super stressed. And what do you think about all that, my love? I asked, genuinely curious about the perspective of the only honest person in this family. I think they're scared that you're going to stop supporting them. Joan looked me straight in the eyes. And I think it's about time. Her words hit me harder than all the desperate calls from her parents. Here was a 16-year-old who perfectly understood the toxic dynamic I had been feeding for years. Grandma, I've been watching this family my whole life. I've seen how Dad and Aunt Eleanor constantly ask you for money, how Mom plans expensive purchases right before visiting you, how everyone acts differently when they need something. Joan spoke with a maturity that broke my heart. And I've also seen how you give them everything without asking for anything in return. That's what a mother does, Joan, a grandmother. I tried to justify decades of behavior that I already knew was wrong. No, Grandma, a mother teaches her children to be independent. A grandmother loves them, but doesn't turn them into parasites. Joan took my hands in hers. Mom told me yesterday that if you sell the properties, we're going to have to move to a smaller place, as if it were a tragedy, that we would have to live on the money Dad earns. Joan's brutal honesty left me speechless. I had raised 2 children who didn't know the value of money because they never had to earn it, and now they were raising their own children with the same mindset of entitlement and dependence. Joan, did you know that Eleanor didn't invite me to her wedding? I asked, needing to know how far the family conspiracy went. Joan nodded sadly. Mom told me about it as if it were a normal thing. She said Aunt Eleanor wanted an elegant wedding and that you wouldn't fit in. I asked her how she could exclude her own mother, and she told me I didn't understand because I was too young. Joan squeezed my hands. But I do understand, Grandma. I understand that they are ashamed of you because you are real, because you worked hard, because you don't pretend to be something you're not. At that moment, watching my granddaughter defend my dignity, when my own children were trampling on it, I made the final decision. Joan was the only one who deserved my inheritance, the only one who had inherited my real values. Joan, I need you to help me with something very important, but it's going to require you to keep some secrets, even from your parents. My voice had become conspiratorial, businesslike. What do you need, Grandma? Joan leaned forward, her eyes shining with curiosity. I need you to help me organize a family meeting. I want everyone to be here on Saturday night. Tell them I have something very important to announce about my future. I smiled with a coldness I hadn't felt in years. And I need you to bring your phone to record everything that's going to happen. Joan looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Grandma, what are you planning? Justice, my love. After 64 years of life, I'm finally going to serve a very cold dish of justice. I took my granddaughter's hands in mine. And you are going to be a witness to how a woman reclaims her dignity. That night, after Joan left, I sat in my study and finished preparing all the documents. Bank transfers, statements, screenshots of conversations, call recordings, everything meticulously organized in folders bearing the names of each of my children. Saturday would be the day the Mason family would finally understand who had been controlling the money all this time. On Saturday night, everyone arrived at my house at exactly 8, as I had requested. Eleanor arrived first, elegant and nervous, carrying a bouquet of expensive flowers that she had probably bought with my money. Michael and Mary arrived 5 minutes later, with Joan walking behind them, her phone discreetly ready in her pocket. Mom, it's so good that you've brought us all together. It's been a long time since we've had a family dinner, Eleanor said, kissing my cheek with those lips that tasted of rehearsed lies. Yes, I needed to talk to all of you about some important decisions I've made, I replied, gesturing for them to sit in the living room. I had prepared coffee and cookies just like in the old days when we were actually a family. Mary settled on the couch, constantly checking her phone. Michael wouldn't stop fidgeting with his watch, nervous. Eleanor smiled too much, that forced smile she used when she wanted something. Only Joan seemed calm, sitting in the armchair in the corner, observing everything with those intelligent eyes that didn't miss a single detail. Well, as you know, lately I've been reflecting a lot on my future, on what's going to happen to me when I get older. I began, pouring the coffee into the cups Eleanor had chosen for me last year. And I've also been thinking about you, about your lives, about everything you've achieved. Eleanor leaned forward. Mom, you're perfectly fine. You don't need to worry about those things yet. Of course I do, Eleanor. At my age, you have to be realistic. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the moment. That's why I've made some very important decisions about my assets. The silence in the room became thick. Michael stopped touching his watch. Mary looked up from her phone. Eleanor maintained her smile, but I saw the muscles in her neck tense. First, I want to tell you about a very interesting conversation I had with George, Adrian's brother. I directed my gaze toward Eleanor, who instantly turned pale. It turns out that he had no idea that you expected a financial contribution from his family for the wedding. Mom, that was a misunderstanding, Eleanor started to say, but I raised my hand to silence her. Let me finish, my love. George was very interested when I told him about all the properties I own, about how I've been financing my family for years. I smiled sweetly. He thought it was very generous of me to support adult children who have professional careers. Michael cleared his throat. Mom, we are not freeloaders. We have jobs, our own income. Really, Michael? I pulled out the first folder of documents I had prepared. According to my records, in the last 5 years, I have transferred $200,000 to you. Your salary as a lawyer is $40,000 a month. Without my help, you couldn't even pay the mortgage on your house. Michael was speechless. Mary looked at him with an expression that mixed panic with reproach. It was obvious she didn't know the exact figures of their financial dependence. And you, Eleanor. I pulled out the second folder. In the same period, you have received $1,600,000. Your job as an architect allows you to live modestly, but not for the luxury condo in the city, nor for the BMW, nor for the trips to Europe. Eleanor tried to maintain her composure. Mom, those were loans. Investments in our future. Loans. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. Eleanor, show me a single document where repayment terms are established. A single piece of paper where you acknowledge that you owe me money. Total silence. Because those documents didn't exist. They had never intended to pay me back. But the most interesting thing, I continued, is that throughout all these years that I have given you millions of dollars, you have decided that I am not good enough to be in your important lives. I took out my phone and played the recording of Eleanor talking about the wedding. Her own voice filled the room. Of course I'm not going to invite my mother. Imagine what a total embarrassment she'll be in front of Adrian's family. Eleanor stood up as if she had been electrocuted. Mom, did you record that conversation? I didn't record anything, Eleanor. You just forgot to hang up the phone when you were talking to Mary. I lied with a cold calmness. For 20 minutes, I listened to you talk about me as if I were an embarrassing nuisance. Michael tried to mediate. Eleanor, is that true? Did you really say those things? It's not what it seems. I was stressed, worried about the wedding. Eleanor stammered, losing all her studied elegance. You were worried about looking bad in front of your fiancé's family, a family that, by the way, is not contributing a single dollar to your $800,000 wedding. My voice had become sharp, businesslike. A wedding that I am going to finance completely, but to which I am not invited. Mary finally spoke in a small, nervous voice. Mother-in-law, there must be an explanation. The explanation is very simple, Mary. My children have lived like millionaires with my money, but they are ashamed of the woman who works to give it to them. I stood up, feeling an energy I hadn't experienced in years. That's why I've made some definitive decisions about my future and yours. Effective immediately, all credit cards that are in your names are canceled. All monthly transfers are permanently suspended. All properties that are in your names are returned to my control. My voice was as firm as steel. Every word was calculated for maximum impact. Eleanor jumped out of her seat. Mom, you can't do that. I have commitments, scheduled payments. Of course I can, Eleanor. They are my cards, my money, my properties. I only put them in your names for tax convenience, but legally they are still mine. I took out a folder full of legal documents. William has already prepared all the paperwork. As of Monday, it will be effective. Michael looked devastated. Mom, we have a mortgage. Expenses for Joan, the life we've built. The life that I built for you, Michael, with my work, my money, my sacrifice. I walked toward him with a cold calmness. And now you are going to learn to build your own lives with your own resources. Mary was crying silently. Eleanor was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Michael had his head in his hands. Only Joan remained serene, discreetly recording everything. "This is emotional blackmail," Eleanor screamed. "You're punishing us for a private conversation." "Emotional blackmail?" My laugh came out cold and cutting. "Eleanor, you plan to marry with my money at a party to which I'm not invited, and I'm the blackmailer. Adrian is going to cancel everything. His family is going to think we are con artists." Eleanor was losing control completely. "Maybe you should have thought about that before calling me a disgrace in front of that very family." I sat down calmly, enjoying watching her fall apart. "But don't worry, Eleanor. I have a proposal." They all looked at me with desperate hope. "You can keep the money for the wedding, the $400,000 you asked for, but on one condition. I sit at the head table. You proudly introduce me as your hard-working mother, who financed your entire education, and publicly thank the woman who made your life of luxury possible." Eleanor turned pale. "I can't do that. Adrian's family—" "Then there's no money, and without money, there's no wedding." I shrugged. "You decide what's more important, your false image or your marriage." Michael tried one last plea. "Mom, think about it carefully. We are your family, your only children. My only children who are ashamed of me, who lie to me, who use me as an ATM." I stood up and walked toward Joan. "But I'm not completely cruel. Joan is not to blame for having parasitic parents." I put my hand on my granddaughter's shoulder. "Joan, you are still my universal beneficiary. When I die, everything will be yours. But when you turn 18, you will also have access to an educational fund that I have created specifically for you." Joan hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Grandma. But I just want you to be happy." "I am going to be happy, my love, for the first time in years." I looked at my children who were watching me with a mixture of shock and desperation. "I'm moving next week. I bought a beautiful condo near the lake. Joan can visit me whenever she wants." "You're moving?" Michael looked lost. "And I'm selling this house. I already have a buyer." I smiled with genuine satisfaction. A young couple who is going to turn it into a home full of true love. Eleanor collapsed on the sofa. "Mom, you can't destroy our family like this." "I didn't destroy anything, Eleanor. You destroyed this family when you decided that my money was more valuable than my presence." I walked toward the door. "The meeting is over. You have until Wednesday to collect your things from my house." 3 months later, I was sitting on the terrace of my new condo, drinking coffee while watching the sunrise over the lake. Joan came to visit me every weekend, telling me about her university plans, her dreams of studying business administration. She was the only one who had inherited my entrepreneurial spirit. Eleanor canceled the wedding. Adrian left her. When he found out the whole truth about their financial situation, Michael and Mary had to sell the house and move to a small apartment. They both got part-time jobs to survive. They never apologized to me. They never acknowledged their mistake, but they also never asked me for money again. I found peace in the silence, in the mornings by the lake, in the afternoons reading books that for years I hadn't had time to enjoy, in the nights planning Joan's business future. I had learned the most important lesson of my life, that true love cannot be bought with money and that dignity is priceless. My children chose money over love. I chose my peace over their parasitism, and I never, ever looked back. 2 years after that night that changed everything, I received an unexpected call. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was watering my plants on the terrace when the phone rang. The name that appeared on the screen surprised me. Michael. "Hello, Mom." His voice sounded different, more mature, tired. "I know I have no right to call you after so long, but I needed to talk to you." I sat in my favorite chair. the one I had bought with my own savings without asking anyone's opinion. "Tell me, Michael." "Mom, Mary and I are getting a divorce." His voice cracked slightly. "It turns out that when your money ran out, she realized that she didn't love the man I really am, but the lifestyle you gave us." I felt neither satisfaction nor sadness, just a kind of cosmic inevitability. "I'm sorry, Michael." "You're not sorry, Mom, and you're right not to be." Michael made a long pause. "These last 2 years have been the hardest of my life, but also the most honest. For the first time in decades, I had to face who I really am without your money as a shield." I heard background noise from a coffee shop. Michael was somewhere public, probably gathering the courage for this call for hours. "And who are you, Michael?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "I'm a mediocre lawyer who for years felt entitled to his mother's money. I'm a father who taught his daughter that money is asked for, not earned. I'm a man who was ashamed of the hardest working woman he knows." His voice trembled. "I'm a coward who let his sister mistreat you because it was economically convenient for me." His words were like knives, but knives that were finally cutting in the right direction. "Mom, I'm not calling to ask you for money. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I'm calling to tell you that I finally understand what you did to us." Michael took a deep breath. "You forced us to grow up." I remained silent, processing his words. Outside, an elderly couple walked hand in hand around the lake. I had been watching them take the same walk every afternoon for 2 years, and always wondered if that's what true love looked like. "Michael, how is Joan?" That was the question that really mattered to me. "Joan is incredible. She got a perfect GPA this semester. She got a part-time job at a law firm. She says she wants to learn the value of money before she inherits yours." Michael laughed, but it wasn't a bitter laugh. "She's identical to you, Mom. She has that determination, that business intelligence." "And Eleanor?" I asked, although I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Eleanor." Michael sighed. "Eleanor is working at a small architecture firm. She lives in a modest apartment, drives a used car. She looks real for the first time in years. But she's also furious. Furious at you, furious at me, furious at the world. Furious? Why? Because she found out that all the important contacts she thought she had were actually contacts of your money. When the expensive dinners and lavish gifts ran out, so did the false friendships." Michael paused. "Adrian married an heiress 6 months after leaving her." I got up from my chair and walked toward the terrace railing. The sun was beginning to set, painting the lake golden. It was a spectacle I never tired of seeing. "Michael, why are you telling me all this?" "Because I want you to know that your plan worked. You broke us to rebuild us. And even though Eleanor still doesn't understand it, I do." His voice had become firm. "I want you to know that I'm learning to be a better man." "And how is Mary handling the divorce?" Michael laughed bitterly. "Mary already has a new boyfriend, an older businessman who supports her just like I supported her with your money. Some people never learn." We were silent for several minutes. I was watching the sunset. He was probably staring at his cold coffee in some anonymous coffee shop. "Mom, there's something else I need to tell you." Michael took a deep breath. "On your 66th birthday, Joan asked me why we didn't call to congratulate you. I didn't know what to answer. My birthday had passed in silence, only with Joan, who came to visit me with a homemade cake and a handmade card. It had been perfect. I didn't need calls, Michael." "Yes, you did, Mom, and we needed to make them, but we were too proud, too wounded in our egos to admit that we missed you." Michael was silent for a moment. "I missed you not as an ATM, but as a mother." I felt something wet on my cheeks and realized I was crying, not from sadness, but from something more complex, maybe relief, maybe hope. "Michael, what do you expect from this call?" Nothing, Mom, absolutely nothing. I just wanted you to know that the man you raised still exists beneath all the garbage I accumulated on top of him. His voice cracked again. And I wanted you to know that I'm proud to be the son of Julia Mason, the woman who built an empire with her own hands. I hung up the phone and stood there, watching as the last lights of day faded over the water. For the first time in 2 years, I felt something akin to hope for my family. Maybe true love can't be bought with money, but sometimes it is found in the silence that remains when the money runs out. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace, or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts, because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses, and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I am certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.